Okay, here we go. We're gonna call the meeting to order at 8:04 p.m. I'll start with roll call.
Okay, Ed Cipriano. Michael Diven,
Present.
Andy Grove,
Here.
Stacy Hill.
She's there.
Stacy doesn't have a mic. Stacy, if you can hear us, we don't see a microphone for you. We're gonna go with yes. Tom Langston, present. Kristen Reisinger. Carrie Ressler. Amanda Rost.
Here.
Shelley Saba. Ian Smith.
Online.
Stefan Stroutmeyer.
Here.
And Chad Wertz.
Here.
Do we have any citizens' comments?
I see no citizens.
I have received an email from somebody that I was gonna talk about. Should I just do that under new business or should I do that here? What's better for you for the minutes?
Your call.
I'll wait till business.
Okay.
All right, the approval of the January 5th meeting minutes, the minutes are attached for those of us that are here. They're in your packet that you were sent online for those of you who are not here. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Second.
Second.
All right, the minutes are approved from last. And then Mindy's here as well. Mindy, then up next is a commissioner report, if you wanna.
I'm gonna pass tonight. The things I had questions on are covered on the agenda, or comments on are covered on other agenda items. I'm a little sick tonight. Sorry, that's why I'm not with you all too.
Yeah. Thank you for saying no.
That's the new pleasantry, like, well, thank you. Feel better. I hope you feel better.
Yeah, it's not COVID, but it's not a fun one either.
Okay, so you don't have anything else other than the things we're gonna cover later.
Exactly, yeah, thanks.
All right, so up next is the prioritization of sports-related improvement projects. So it feels like we just did this, right?
Yep, here we are again.
And here we are again for the next go round. So this is also in your packet. And it looks like David has nicely crossed off the things that were funded. Is that right, David?
That's correct. I did strike through on anything that was funded and I added one item, new tennis court reconstruction for courts 3 and 4. 5 and 6 are funded in the budget this year and 3 and 4, well, 7 and 8 were done a couple years ago. And so 3, 4 would take care of all the bubble courts, which all need reconstructed.
And that would be the end after 3, 4, like at least for a little while. Everything has
Yeah.
kind of been done.
Well, it would take care of court reconstruction for a bit. I mean, all the courts are very old and, you know, could probably need it. But with the bubble courts, it's just a special situation because they're covered under bubble all year. They get rock hard. And whereas the outdoor courts get freeze and thaw, and that loosens up the material. Plus the bubble courts have subsurface irrigation. And so because they're rock hard, they won't irrigate as well or drain as well. So they get the worst of everything. Yeah, and so the outdoor courts, we have above ground irrigation, we get freeze and thaw, so we can get by there a lot easier than we can in the bubbles.
Okay, would the pricing be similar to what it is above, it is above for 5 and 6?
The price will go down. I apologize, I don't have a budget number in there. It needs to be updated, but I probably have something pretty close that I can pop in there. But the price went down for each phase because of less work required and less engineering, meaning less construction work and less engineering. It's just the way it worked out on that project. We needed a little more electrical, a little more site work on phase 1. We'll need a little less of both of those on phase 2 and even less still on phase 3. And I think we'll pretty much have this dialed by the 3rd time through the process. So it should be a lot easier.
Okay. And then it looks like yellow, the darker yellow highlighted that you have a price in there for Bird Park.
Yeah, that
And
came.
that's basically perfect.
Right, right.
And turf.
That is turf, yes, and that came, you know, after this list was prioritized, but before we published the CIP. So this is what's in the CIP right now.
Okay. And I mean, when you see how many things are crossed off, it makes you feel pretty good. Yeah, so we need to, I guess the question is, do we want to, taking out the things that are, crossed off, do we want to reorder anything? So the big thing would be, I think we would keep lighting, and returfing the Seymour Fields where they are, because that was a sort of a statement to say that that was a high priority, even though we knew it wasn't gonna happen this current year. 3 is Brafferton, which was funded. So we could do more, we could either change that to the more extensive sort of project that is kind of being talked about with Brafferton, which would be changing the format, the parking lot, the play structures. There's been some talk with that, so we can kind of put that in its place and bump it up or down. If we take it out, Bird Park would be 3rd.
Do you think Bird Park would be more impactful?
In Brafferton, yeah.
I mean, I think it could actually go above replacing the turf fund. At least we already have turf.
I guess my question is, do you
Turf
think
better
it's
work,
do you think it's reasonable, like possible, reasonable?
No, but.
Realistic.
But neither were half the things that
Yeah.
got approved last year, which was pretty cool.
Well,
so.
True.
I mean, I think if we're looking at that aspect, I mean, we know that lighting Seymour and Middles would be a component of the turf replacement 1 and 2. You know, we know that we feel, I would say we feel confident, hopefully as a community, that they will replace the turf.
When it's time.
When it's time, right? I think when you look at the Bird Park facility that's constantly under repair and it's not used and it's such a demand of use, I would prioritize that to number 1. I mean, if you're asking us to rank stuff, I would rank Bird Park 1.
I feel the same way.
I mean, just reading about the 91 and 97% permit rate, the number of hours being used.
It'd be a total game changer to the community.
Plus, it's in the study that was done.
Correct.
It has support from the consultants. I mean, it's got a little bit of.
So
momentum
could
right
you, could I suggest Bird Park 1 and then making lighting Seymour in middle 2 and 3? The rest of it stays the same? Would you agree to that,
now. I'd agree with that.
Mike?
Great. Anybody online have any thoughts? I would argue, well, Bird Park in general is sort of 11 on that is the permanent restrooms and pavilion. That spark is 11. I would,
Well, we can move that up. I think if you
Bump that
do
up
that
with
project,
it.
that would move it up with it, right? 1, 2,
yeah,
3,
I would
4.
feel like,
Yeah, I would put those together and when I look at this, so we are all fairly certain that nothing is going to happen to the turf on Cedar for Seymour and Middlefields for at least another year. So would we be better off trying to push forward Bird Park, knowing that there's going to be a delay, a timing delay on the other one?
yeah, I mean, I think you can argue it either way, whether you.
I would think the likelihood of something other than turf going into Cedar is highly unrealistic. Because I think it's a timing issue. It's just a game of when it gets done.
And David, there's partial funding for it already, right? Because of the money that's been collected over the years.
Yeah, all the field usage fees and any sign fees, advertising banners was all earmarked for turf.
For sure. So it's at least partially.
Is that the contribution, the offset,
Yes,
the 300,000?
Like half.
But the key to this sheet is if and when it gets attention with commissioners, they say, what's the budget? We're thinking, oh, okay, it's number 1. All right, we should look at that, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Mindy, a question about Brafferton, when we met with like the community people and there was talk about doing more, like sort of changing that. What's the process with that, or where does that stand, doing the longer term project? Is there a way to put a budget number on that? We don't really know what we want to do, so that's hard to.
Yeah, that project needs a champion, and Parks was mildly interested in trying to be that champion. It needs like an owner to really like push it through, like a Parks board or a sports board or the combined board. And then they can help facilitate future neighborhood discussions and flush out what the neighbors in the community really wants to see there. And then we can send it to Gateway to get some estimates on it.
Okay.
So if you put it as a priority and gave it a couple of volunteers, then that could get it there for this year, or we could punt it to next year when the boards are, I mean, there's no reason why we can't work together now.
Sure, sure. Okay, so I think we want to put something on here. Rafferton, we can delete what's there in terms of the project, the first few columns, but I think we should keep the sort of the impact notes and comments, maybe, David, and add something about. I mean, the project would be to sort of overhaul, a larger overhaul of the park.
Oh,
The parking lot, the, changing what's offered at the park.
mhm.
And dollar wise, we don't really have a clue because we don't really know what it would be. But I think it's good to keep it on here because that's definitely part of this.
Keep whatever is decided on improvements to the rest of the park. You're not talking about keeping all the information we had about what we're doing for the,
Yes, so not the comments, you're right. So take the comments you can take off, but keep the impact notes because that just used and stuff.
I got you.
Chad just made an interesting comment. I think it's something we should look at as far as the ease of doing some things. The number was at 10 right now is the signage, which isn't a very realistic and achievable thing to be done very quickly. And, from a prioritization standpoint, we know that that's within reach of what we were working with the township to get the process approved. And once it's approved, that could be installed. And that could be something we could see done very realistically within months. I don't know, again, it's not a big priority, but from a realization standpoint, it's super easy.
It's good to check a few off the list. I mean, Mindy, from a commissioner's standpoint, is it better to have a few easier ones towards the top of the list, or?
No, not necessarily. It's okay to put a big ticket item up there and then that gets it in the discussion. I'd put what you really want done, and I know we talked about this last year a little bit, like trying to game the system. I can't, it might just backfire, I don't, and so it just tells the top 5 things you really think we should be paying attention to, and we'll get estimates on them.
I mean, I think the signage is, we've got funding for that. I think it's gonna happen. I mean, you could make that 5 if you wanted to.
I was gonna say, if the funding isn't an issue, I think that we don't need to put it at the top of the list because it's
Right.
for the budget for the following
Correct.
year.
Yeah.
Right? So at the second page, I think the top line, the recreation thing, so copied over, but if you look at the second page, not items 2 and 3, the futsal multi-purpose court resurfacing and expanding the parking. Those are sort of ideas for the rehauling Rafferton, David, if that makes sense. So those are kind of all one thing.
Okay,
Do you see that?
I'm looking for, yes, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know how you wanna put that in there, but
Does that,
Oh, just,
offer,
I'm sorry.
does that offer, to fund the project in exchange for priority? Is that a standing offer?
no, I
Yeah.
would say no. Not that if someone approached them and said, hey, we're ready to do this, would you be willing to fund it for use priority? I think they would still be open to it. I think they're looking at other options and stuff now. But, and Shelley's not here to say yes or no to that, but that's my understanding.
I think you kind of roll the futsal court, the parking,
Yeah.
and address other aspects of the park into one
One
kind of
big
phase
thing.
2,
Yes.
Rafferton phase 2.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. My only thing is, and we're not super well represented tonight by people that are not in a field sport. But it seems like the tennis and paddle and the golf course and the ice rink. Of those non-field things, what do we want to put up higher? And sort of what's left. So the tennis courts, you have lights. And the reconstruction of the other 2 courts, the ice rink resurfacer. was 5
Dave,
last year.
Did they buy it? I thought they bought it, a resurfacer in the 2008, 2010. Was it electric or was it used
No, we bought a brand new electric unit.
the 2000? Because it said the last one was in 1997, but I thought.
No, that might be the older of the
Yeah.
two is a 97 unit. The new one that we have is maybe, I'm gonna say somewhere around 2010, 2012, something like that. So even our newest one's, 12 or more years old. So,
Right, and they're looking at replacing, they have two, they're replacing one of the two.
we would replace the older
One
one
will go as far as.
and we'll keep the newer one. Yeah.
I think that's a priority to the meeting. That goes down. One of the things I think when you looked at, we've looked at this in the past, if the ice rink is a consistent contributor to the revenue of the township, that would be detrimental to the recreation department not to have.
Yeah, if we have two machines down, we'd be in trouble.
I mean, that falls in, we've had this conversation before, like lawnmowers for the golf course and a Zamboni are necessary for the two revenue funds for the.
And you could probably go a few days at the golf course without a mower, but you're not gonna go a few days without a
I'll be
Zamboni.
calling.
So I'm thinking, so we right now we have Bird Park and this is all obviously flexible. Bird Park at 1 and 2, the main park, Dixon, Seymour, Middlefields 3 and 4. Do we want to leave the ice resurfacer then at 5?
Yeah, I like that.
And then Brafferton maybe make 6, since they've already done some work on it. Then the paddle lighting would be 7. We could leave that at 7.
8 and 9.
And then
You mean
8,
tennis lighting?
yeah, tennis lighting, sorry.
All right, now you're going too fast
I'm
for
sorry,
me.
I'm sorry. I'm just, okay, so we have Bird Park at 1 and 2.
Yep.
So, and then we have Main Park 3 and 4 for the lighting and the returfing.
Okay.
We're gonna leave the ice rink resurfacer at 5.
Got it,
6, we're gonna do the Brafferton phase 2.
got it.
7, we don't have a 7.
7 is tennis court lighting.
No, you're right, I just said that. 7 is tennis court lighting. I'm just gonna go through and then we can make any changes and then
Yeah.
8 would be the golf course. So the things left at the golf course are the restrooms. And then renovating the clubhouse. But the yellow item was what we had recommended as the top thing at the golf course, which is done. So do we wanna elevate the restroom? And make that 8, and then that would put signs at 9.
Meadowcraft,
Yes, there's
there's
a
a,
basketball
yeah,
court in
that,
there.
yeah. You would wanna,
We wanna add that in somewhere.
Make that 10.
Hey Amanda, this is Ian.
Yes.
I was having some audio issues earlier and I think it was during when you were talking about Brafferton, or not, I'm sorry, not Brafferton, Bird Park.
Yes,
And correct if I'm wrong, but I just heard you say that we put Bird Park as the #1 most impactful project
yes,
this year.
I think we
Can you-
were talking
Can
about.
you give me a quick review on that? Because I didn't, I must have been when I had to log off.
Sure, so I think the idea was that we know that we're confident or fairly confident that the lighting and the resurfacing would happen at middle. So should we bump up Bird Park when you look at the hours it's used, the size of the field, et cetera? And make that 1 and 2 and make middle 3 and 4.
Okay, do we have information that is more impactful to the community than?
Well, I think that we were looking at, if you look at on the thing, it says that it was permitted 91 to 97% of the time. It's a total of just under 1,000 hours in the spring and fall. And the limitations are due to field conditions, limited parking, and a lack of storm shelter. After Cedar Turf Fields, this is Mount Lebanon's asset with the most potential impact on youth sports. Thousands of people use the athletic field each year, and there is only one porta potty. So I think.
Right,
that-
so it's not the most impactful.
Well, yes, I think that's, and I think it has the fewest, and part of that is because of lighting, right? So you technically have more available hours on middle because it's lit. So if you're going purely based on hours used, middle would win out.
Do you know how many times the permitted use is canceled because of weather?
No,
On the turf?
No, on Bird Park.
no.
Oh, gosh, no, we
20%
wouldn't
of
track
the-
that. No, we don't track
But we
that.
know that having been there, that we've canceled probably a third of our practices.
Yeah.
Every soccer season,
It's, yeah,
at least.
we know it's a high number.
Yeah. So I think that when you start to look at 1,000 hours and we know that we're losing well over 300 just based on weather, that's the extra 290 of field time for lighting. I mean, there's a trade-off. That's why I think that this.
Yeah, I guess, but you can make the same argument for the main park turf. Because you only have half of it lit. And really only 2 sports can significantly use the part that's lit, the diamond sports. I just, are we making the change because we think it might happen? I object to that thought process, because if you're presenting this to the commission and they're budgeting ahead and they know that they're going to address this project, the lights adding on Seymour, at a later date, well, then they're educated enough to know that, okay, let's look at the next impactful project that we may be able to fit into this next budget.
Right. And we've argued
But if
this.
it's not more impactful, I don't think you should put it one just as a matter of course.
Right, and we've argued this sort of back and forth, I feel like every time we have this conversation, whether we should put middle as the first and second, even though it's not supposed to be, and the last time we decided we did want to put it that, because we wanted to get it in front of the commissioners that this was coming down the pipe, and they need to be aware of that, and it definitely needs to happen when it's time. David, are we thinking 2025 for that, or because next budget year is 2024, right? This is for the
Yeah.
2024 budget year.
It's currently estimated at 25. But, you know, if it's in good shape, we probably would just
Push it
keep
next
going,
year.
yeah, keep pushing it until we know it's at the end of its useful life.
And Ian, one of the things that I don't know if you heard it, one of the things that I shared, or at least my thought was, you know, in my opinion, it'd be highly unlikely that they wouldn't redo the turf there when it's due. And at that time, you know, the lighting would be a part of it, and that goes into budgeting in a 2025 plus range. The Bird Park asset would give us another, you know, use within that time frame. So if we're budgeted for 2024, and then the turf would be done in 2025, we would have, you know, 2 surfaces to deal with as opposed to 1. And I'm assuming that lighting Bird Park would probably not be realistic.
No. I think people.
You're looking at me, I mean,
I
I,
think-
Is that the
I think
ultimate,
getting
is that like the ultimate push, right?
I'd say it would be unlikely.
Well, and I guess the other thing to think about is the timing of this. They're not gonna spend, first of all, that we all said that the chances of them approving Bird Park in 2024 is slim to none, right? And the next year of 2025 is the Cedar turf. They're not gonna turf both those fields in the same
Right.
year, nor would we want them to. So you're,
Discount.
you'd get a
Yeah,
discount.
there's a
And
discount.
then the sports would have literally no fields to use. You would just not have any sports that year or that 3 months or however long it takes. You gotta, I think you have to stage
No, I
those
know.
things. So I don't know, maybe you move Bird Park back down to 3 and 4 because it wouldn't happen until 2026 realistically. If it were to happen at all. I can see it both either way. Does anybody else have any?
I can
thoughts?
see all that, but I think, I don't think our jobs is to look into the future. I think it's just what are the most impactful projects that, I mean, are on the horizon, I guess, but I don't know where we can look into a crystal ball and decide what the commission is going to do in the future as far as budgeting.
Yeah, I think timing, I think Bird Park is gonna be really, we're talking about turfing Bird Park, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's gonna be a huge kind of community conversation, take lots of time. And if the sports board did even put it again as the top tier, it could mean that people want to come to the sports board and give public comment or take up sport, or have the conversation at the sports board if that's where there's the most momentum. And it could be a big time commitment just for this board alone. It's just something to keep in mind. I'm not trying to influence the ranking at all. There's the full picture. It's a more difficult one than, like, let's say McNeely or even turfing Brafferton.
I guess to me, like, we could debate it back and forth, but making Bird Park 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4. Will the commission take that as any less serious of an idea? I mean,
Not really, top 5, I mean, a little bit more, like the number one is like gonna get the most time, attention and discussion, so maybe put some thought into that. And then the rest is top 5, and that's all gonna be looked at about the same,
okay,
I would think.
Is the Middlefield's life expectancy 2025 based on the warranty at a time of, or is this based on the annual sort of assessment and
It was
evaluation?
based on an inspection from the manufacturer. Warranties 8, 2025 would be 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, they warranty for 8, they kind of expect 10. He did say the field, was maintained very, very well. But I think we're gonna have to see what it looks like in another year and another year after that and so on. I mean, it's not gonna wear forever. I mean, I think 10 is probably about what you're gonna get. We might get another year, but we'll just have to wait and see. It does get a ton of use, but it's been very well maintained.
Should we consider resurfacing the field and putting lights as one project?
Oh, yeah, that's the
So I,
only way the lights are gonna
we have
happen.
it 1 and 2, why don't we make it 1?
make it 1.
1 and 1.
And then we get something else in our top 5, right?
Well, that's true. I think that's not a bad idea. And the same thing with Bird Park. It's all
One thing anyway.
So we could do that. Now, the question is, do you want to put Bird Park as 1 and Main Park and Middle?
I don't
call it
think it
Middle,
matters
so I have to
either
say
way.
all the names.
So
I don't know that it matters.
On that same notion, I mean, I would think that the bird park would, the bathroom and storm shelter would be at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's like overhauling the park.
I would say to keep Bird Park, those 2 items separate, because you're more likely. I'm not as invested into all of this as you guys, but
Yeah.
it seems very unrealistic to get Bird Park tournaments.
Where we could
But it
do
seems
permanent.
more realistic to have a structure and a bathroom in there. So I would not combine those.
I would agree with that.
Good point.
But yeah,
Okay, so. We're gonna make the lighting and returfing one thing. Cause that's a group together. So do we wanna make that 1 or 2 and one or I guess 3?
3 and 3 or 1 and 1?
Yeah,
Make it 1.
this middle.
You know,
teamwork.
like based on this conversation, doesn't really.
Yeah,
Leave
I
it at
think so.
1.
As long as it's
And
at
then
the
we
top of the
can
list
say
somewhere, that's good.
Turfing Bird Park is 2 and the bathrooms at Bird Park is 3.
Or if you're suggesting to flip that, make
Or
the
reverse,
bathrooms.
bathrooms 2.
Bathrooms would be universal, whether it was turf or not, right?
Right.
yeah, I mean, it's if there's. Just a porta john down there, like I said, I think if they're gonna do any kind of construction. That seems logical.
Yeah.
You can even do a combo shelter bathroom thing.
Yeah, that's what I think they need. And the shelter is literally just if there's a lightning storm, the
Mhm.
kids have somewhere to go, because they cancel
safety.
soccer games if there's any lightning,
Mhm.
because it's so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think impact. And realistic,
Yeah,
you're most likely to get that before you.
okay. Are you good, Ian, are you good with that? If we do middle as 1 and then bathrooms at Bird 2 and surfing Bird 3? Is that, do you agree with that?
I'm good with not having to discuss it any longer. I mean, I mean, I've been saying it for years. I still don't understand why they have to be done at the same time. But I don't know. It just is a bigger number in the second column.
Yeah,
But I don't know what matters at this point in terms of getting something like that done. Is it the cost? Is it? I don't know. So honestly, I don't really care. I think things, as I've said numerous times, they have to be listed based on tangible impact that the group thinks, and not what we look at and think the board might do or not do. I just don't think that's a good use of our time here.
Is there conduit already in place anticipating additional
No,
lights? No, so that needs to be done.
That does
And
need to
that
be done.
Involves the field itself.
The main reason to do them both at the same time is you have to put a crane on the field, and we're not gonna put a crane on the field without having the turf off. We're
I
not
think
gonna
that's
risk
that's
that.
why when we're asking why it's being done, what lights now and returf is that you're going to damage the current turf by putting the lights in.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, there are ways to do it. You could put down mats, you could do all kinds of things, but that's gonna drive up costs. You're gonna have to hold the contractors accountable if there is damage to the turf. That's gonna come at a cost. It just makes sense to do it when you've removed the turf and there's much less risk of damage.
Which I believe, I think at the high school, the rock pile, it was put in place, so you
There's no
didn't have
conduit
to,
at the rock. There's no conduit at the rock.
none. Mr. Marciniak,
What's that?
Marciniak, verify that they did not. put
Oh, I know they didn't.
He's the facilities.
Yeah, no, there's no conduit there.
Interesting.
That's from Jeff Kaiser.
Kaiser.
That would be.
So what comes up and then,
Okay, so don't write this down yet, David. I'm gonna say it out loud and then we'll agree to it and then you can write it down because we're gonna keep changing our minds.
Yep.
So one is middle turfing and lighting. 2 is bathrooms at Bird Park, 3 is turfing Bird Park, 4 is the ice rink resurfacer, 5 is Brafferton Part 2. 6 would be lighting the tennis courts. 7 would be golf course restrooms. 8 would be North Meadowcroft Phase 3 basketball courts, and then 9 would be signs. And then, is there anything else? There's renovating clubhouse. There is, part of Bird Park is renovating the parking lot area down Beedling Road. There's new tennis court construction. There's enhancing the field and spectator areas as part of, Middle and Seymour that we could make 10. Want to have a top 10. Anybody have any thoughts on what 10 could be?
I would say the spectator area and stuff, that would probably get lumped into a renovation of the field area as well. If you're gonna be tearing up the whole turf. It's a good time to do the fencing and lighting and everything else. I don't know if you can do replay, I don't know what the field's well enough, but I don't know if you could do the fencing without damaging the field.
I mean, the other one that I'll throw out there that's not on here, if you're talking about turfing. Dixon would be something that should be suggested as well. If you did middle, if you redid middle and Seymour. Adding Dixon to that would be huge to use.
Turfing Dixon?
Yes, it's already lit. It would be a small expense to the total project. And that would have it would have a massive impact to all sports.
Would love to see that turfed.
And it would be very, I
That's a
think,
great idea.
I think the dollar value would be very small to the big project.
All right, do we want to make that 10 or do we want to bump something and make it higher?
I would say we probably, I would say bump it higher because if they're seriously intending at some point, which they need to, returfing Seymour and Middle, it should be right up there with it so that they're looking at all 3 at the same time.
And Stacy, one of the things that we see, and I'm sure Ian would agree, we see very commonly in the diamond sports is. Leaving the grass outfield is an option and just turfing the infield. It's a lot less costly, but obviously turfing on all of it would be the best option, but. Turfing the infield would be the easiest option.
Yeah, we've had a lot of wear and tear in that outfield. We put micro soccer out there. I mean, if you're turfing, you might as well go all the way.
Yeah, turf the whole thing.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
keep in mind-
It would have a greater impact on across sports because you could
Multiple sports, yeah.
have other rectangular sports use it, not a game fashion, but for other
100%.
events and practices. And things.
Practice and stuff.
You
Yeah.
want to do this 1, 2, maybe you do 2 as Dixon and then push everything out up 1.
Well, keep in mind, if you were to turf Dixon, you're starting from scratch. You're doing a lot of excavation. There's gonna be permitting. That is going to be a lot more complicated project than just putting down new
Redoing
carpet
yeah.
on existing fields. I don't know. Like, I'd have to talk to the engineers to say, well, would you even bid these together? How would you, time those projects so that works out? It could be tricky.
And I think I think I recall in the conversation with the high school, I think the mobilization fee was like 85 to 100,000 for the turfs when they did them. So, when if you look at that, the mobilization of having someone to come out to do both, you'd be able to appreciate that fee across.
But all the more reason for the timing to have to be perfect.
Correct.
So,
Because you'd have another 60,000 or whatever would be for that field for someone to mobilize to come out and.
yeah, I'm sure it could be done. It's just another moving
It's
part.
planning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we look at this again next month, right?
Well, I was gonna
What's the
say,
time?
this doesn't have to be done tonight. It doesn't even have to be done next month. It absolutely would be, need to be done in May, but then remember, if you don't have a quorum in May and it's not done, you got a problem.
Mhm.
The earlier the better, because if there is something like, let's say Dixon Field, that needs to be a discussion with the engineer and we need to, do some more research on a particular thing, the more time I have, the better.
Sure.
Because my drop dead deadline for my CIP stuff is June.
Okay.
So
Why don't I'm gonna propose for tonight, for the sake of saving some time, that we make Dixon Turf 10 to get it on the page. And let's take out the things that have been crossed out. Do you want me to, if you wanna email me this, I can,
yeah, I was gonna suggest, like, I'll do whatever and then send it to you and you can work on it a little bit.
that sounds good. And
Yeah.
we'll come up with, because it's hard at this point with all the numbers and we've gone through it a couple of times. I think a clean, take what we talked about tonight, put Dixon on as 10. Everybody think of any other projects that they might want to add to the list for next month. And then we'll take another stab at it next month. This is not set in stone.
Dixon Turf.
We can have that argument between Birch Park and Middlefield.
Can we,
You can see more of this kind of stuff.
There's a lot of different thoughts there, so.
can we go, if we think you're done with the prioritizing, at least for tonight, if you could go over those
One more
slowly for me.
Sure, so I think we're at one, we're joining the lighting and turfing of Seymour, that's one. The bathrooms at Bird Park are 2. The turfing Bird Park is 3.
Yep.
Ice rink resurfacers 4.
Okay.
Rafferton Phase 2 is 5.
Okay, let me find that.
That's like it's on below Bird Park.
Yep, I got that.
Okay, and then tennis and paddle center, the lighting there is number 6. It was 7, now it's 6.
Yep.
And then Mount Lebanon Golf Course. 8 was done, so we were gonna go down to golf course restrooms and make that 7.
Hmm.
North Meadow Cross, right above that phase, 3 would be 8. Signs would go from 10 to 9. And then let's put Dixon Turf as 10, just to get it on the list.
Got it.
But we need to kind of take out the things that were done and then bump up the things that are left. And some of the stuff is highlighted in yellow, which was our top things, and other things are still.
Right.
I think parking at Bird Park is just as important as the bathroom, but that's my own opinion.
I'll clean it up, send it to you,
Okay,
and you can.
and we'll take
Bring it
another
home.
stab next month. And if anybody has a project that they want to add to the list, they can email David and I will add it. All right, the item 6 is standardized field signage.
Yeah, you wanna prepare that up to the last second, or just.
No, I can do that.
Okay, you got it.
1 second.
Here's the-
Gosh.
And this all just be a moment.
I'll talk while you're pulling it up, just going, so, following up to the last meeting with the field signage, I spoke with, Mindy, and the recommendation was to provide some type of structure moving forward. I met with Rudy Sukul, talked to Keith McGill as well regarding what would be a proposal. David's been involved, and Minnie's been involved. So this is a document that's there that we have in our hands and we'll pull up, is basically identifying the fields of the surfaces, and the proposed signs that would be installed at each. So starting from Dixon Middle, this Clint Seymour, Cedar Fields, the middle lot, for parking, the Seymour lot for parking, the Cedar Fields for the concession stand, Bird Park parking lot, Brafferton and Brafferton Field. If you look at image A, which are two designs that were shared conceptually. As I shared with Minnie, there are no restrictions in the use of these particular signs, but there were two different fields. It was it's a suggested idea of what the image could look like. Image B was a consolidated sign that was suggested. It's not a great image, we kind of replicated it, but basically kind of reiterating some of the primary rules of field usage. And it would eliminate all of the miscellaneous aged and you get 10 signs at one field. This would give us one sign that would kind of bring all of, I think one of the things that we didn't have on there was the other one was, organized use of the field is permitted, things like that. So we can look at that obviously and discuss what they would be. Image C, when Minnie and I spoke, we thought it was a good idea for the identification for emergency purposes. Right now, none of the fields have any type of emergency information from a location and or a site number. David, Mindy, is it with the township? There's is it with emergency response? The assets are identified numerically. Is that correct?
I wasn't aware of that. David, you know?
Say the question.
So
site number.
there's a reference number that the emergency responders use internally.
If they do, it's not like shared with the facility. Like I don't have an asset number for rec center or the swimming pool. It's an interesting idea, but no, we just give the address.
So when I talked to Rudy said that, that there are, I guess it's a part of a plan or a part of something that they have for that purpose. So again, basically getting at it was, where are you? What's the address? And is there a site number? And that's kind of what these signs would generate. Putting a QR code on signs now is easy to be able to do that as well. But this was a suggestion that came out of conversation with Mindy that would enable us to have, a better sense of security or response time for injuries.
It seems like you would ask the emergency, whoever, people, what they.
Oh, for sure. We didn't put that on there as an
Yeah,
example.
Like whatever
100%.
it is, the address, the night site
Right.
number, whatever it is, they
Right.
want to hear. That's what they put on the sign.
Yeah.
But I love this design. I think it's perfect. I mean, it's, it's not the final design, but I like this idea, this concept. I think it's really helpful.
So image D is actually what is at the middle fields now. It's only on one side. This sign basically gives you the rules of the turf. David's already made us aware that is up and updated.
Thank you for remembering that.
But that's only on one side. This is not referenced on the Seymour side. So again, this sign would be updated and installed.
It is, I'm pretty sure it is, on the Seymour side. It's just at an angle that nobody sees as they're entering the field.
Okay.
There is a version of it.
I can tell you it was made. I don't know if it's still there.
Yeah.
Well, sure.
What looks
It's there
like
at one
it's
point.
been torn up
Yeah.
based on the image here.
Yeah, I just vividly remember that it was there at some point because of, it is on the angle that faces, that's not where you would see it if you use that entrance. So I always thought that was an interesting choice.
So
It's either there or in front of the bleachers, Dan, so I went with that.
So again, a part of that would be to replace the rules for the athletic turf surfaces. Make sure that on both sides. And then from a supplemental standpoint, you know, the batting cage rules, you know, kind of an example of the parking signs, the, you know, enter, and then some of the additional signs that were there, just pulling examples like basketball courts, pickleball courts, tennis courts, park rules. These are just things that were kind of put up in the master conversation around common identification. So this was provided, I think, Mindy, you can comment. We are providing this to the designer now to come back with a plan that would give us the ability to move forward with a consolidated look or a consolidated plan that would allow the parks and the sports to move forward with certain signage.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that Laura gave it to them already, in fact.
Did the Mount Lebanon School District, because at one point there were some blue versions of this
Right.
with the Lebo or
Yep.
Mount Lebanon, is that part of the planning process?
So,
Also, the same
um,
designer would be used for those?
So, we've received 100% support from the school district. They love the concept. They love the idea. They narrowed it down to 2 different options as well, from a sign standpoint. And I think they would just go along with.
Okay,
the
so like if they
process.
pick, like keep their font the same, et cetera. But the idea would be you would replace the Mount Lebanon logo with some sort of school district.
Right,
logo.
they were, and I know David, we've talked about this as well, but they really like the idea of having better signage. They really like the idea of being able to determine that it's a school district managed field as opposed to a township managed field. They like that conversation that, you know, for whatever reason, but it went
Because they get
beyond,
the same calls you get.
yeah,
They
Yeah.
get calls about middle turf and you
Yeah.
get calls about the rock pile.
Clears up confusion, I think.
yeah. So, and it kind of, and when John Grogan was involved, and of course it just, you know, which is good, but it spun out of, you know, went out of this thing, you know, from a standpoint of, you know, a couple surfaces to, you know, really having uniform signage around the school district in terms of parking, and they're looking at it the same way. It's not just the field signage. They're looking at, wait, hey, where do you come in? Where do you exit? So it could be a really cool concept that would not only affect the township, but also the school district in tandem.
Great. So what's the next step? We'll wait to hear from the designer.
So I keep saying it's Colano, correct?
Yeah, Colano's the designer.
So
That's right.
Colano has the information, they have the proposed design, and they're kind of come back with some suggestions. And Minnie, do we have any idea on the timeframe?
No, I think they just got it because they were waiting on what you did more recently, even as recently as last week, the names of the fields that you saw at the top. Excuse me, the names of the you know, what we want the field names to be. And then I know you talked to Keith last week, right?
Yep.
And then I think that sort of like cleared it, and then that's when it got sent over to them. So just a, you know, they probably only just have seen it for a couple days now.
Right.
That they'll probably come back with questions and probably, you know, and then want to do some of their own recon, some of their own site visits a little bit to get an idea. So I don't know what the timeline is, but I think now might be the right time that I can ask now that they've seen it and see if they have any follow-ups.
And then I shared with Keith as well, Rudy proposed that, you know, once we come up with a similar concept, that we would have you know, the different signs made and evaluated based on what, unless there was one design that they liked in particular, that he felt it would be worthwhile to have some concepts developed.
All right, we'll move on to item 7, comprehensive plan advisory group. Looked like there was a letter that was from Ian attached with an update
Yeah,
in the packet. Is there anything else?
I did include that in your packets. I don't know if Mr. Grove has anything further he'd like to share.
Yeah, we had one meeting with the plan of going to 2 or 3 more, I think, coming up, but it was a pretty general meeting. They broke out several groups of the public, like St. Clair Hospital, they were representative for a variety of groups, and they determined that the parks and sports specifically had a lot of impact on their survey, the Ascend Lebo survey. So parks and the sports drove the majority of the comments from the public. But they didn't really get into any details of what our input would be. But I do think that, you know, our representation for me will, you know, have to be said at some point to say, you know, what the advisory board would want. So, you know, I'll echo kind of the priority list, when that time comes, but it didn't really have kind of comment for us specifically. It was more general terms. So I think 2 more meetings are scheduled.
Okay.
I would assume I'll have a chance to present at some point.
Okay. All right, item 8 is temporary lighting for the upper practice field, which we added to the agenda because we brought that up last week. So what's happening?
So, a couple things. One is, we've been working with the school district. They've done their internal approval. And we have an engineer that is in the process of doing an evaluation. The challenge that is at the high school is you can only light one side of the field. So you can't get on the hill and you can't get on the sides. So determining what the appropriate amount of wattage or lumens would be required. We did a site visit at the River Hounds facility. And I say Coriopolis, but it's across the river. I guess it's Coriopolis. They utilized portable generator for lighting they still do in some aspects. So did a site visit there, kind of got an idea of what they're using, the height, and the power and the demand of fuel, sound, all the things that they had to do. So they've been super cooperative, Allegheny County, the River Hounds, and I think Allegheny Health Network's been involved with that. So now we're just determining what would be the requirement to properly light that field with temporary.
What do we think timing wise is reasonable?
I would say that we should have feedback within, by our next meeting, we would have definitive costs and definitive. I mean, there have been educated guests based on what, but they haven't done the calculations, but as an example, the River Hounds used 4 units per sideline, and the recommendation was that there would be 5 just based on lack of 3 sides. So, I mean, they're going to determine if that's the case, or you can increase the wattage or the lumens that would be required. But I would think within the next month for sure, we would have cost structure, sound, lighting.
And then after that, it's figuring out who's gonna pay for it.
And I think that's I think that's the cost impact that would be there would be, because they've actually shared the usage and the the fuel and demands. And so we can actually correlate that to hours.
Do you think that there's a chance to have it happen for the spring season?
Yeah, I think so. It could be realistic. Yeah, I mean, the district was very favorable to it.
And would they do a shared, like, pass through, the district covers a portion and then the pass through for anybody who
Yes,
rents it, pass
Yes.
through expense?
the other thing that I'll share, it was a verbal conversation. The district was very receptive and interested in learning more about potentially increasing the cost of the upper practice field and decreasing the cost of the stadium. So looking at, a reasonable number for the upper surface
Yeah, I have some good charts for that.
and lowering the lower and understanding that the turf actually has a lifespan, and if you don't use it within that lifespan, it's a lost use. So, the idea that they've had historically was kind of like an a la carte where you have to do, the bathrooms and concession and, an employee and lighting. And so when we take those things away, one of the other concerns that came up was the track. It's a school district asset, but it's used by the community. When the field's closed, the community can't use the inner track. So, that was a conversation, part of the conversation that came up, but pleasantly surprised on the reaction of doing some type of understanding of what would a reasonable cost be for the upper.
I have some supply and demand curves for them to take a look at, where they can see how much money they would make if they lower the cost.
Right, and that was really the conversation
Yeah.
was, if you, I think we said that lowers at 35 or 40% utilization.
In the spring, it's like 3% on weekends.
Yeah,
I mean, they don't use it at all because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
So, and also online, it's very confusing to look at the costs, and it depends on how many people in your organization. They have this like big chart. I wish that or what I would recommend or will recommend at some point is to have a Mount Lebanon youth sports pricing that's set for, and because all of Mount Lebanon sports have the vast majority of Mount Lebanon residents. And it's youth sports that are developing into high school athletes eventually. Could we have one set of pricing for that? So we'll continue that conversation with their state. There's good data to back that up.
Amanda, did you ever confirm that there was a practice price for the stadium turf?
No, I emailed
website?
the new person at the new reservation person and did not hear back. I have the like a la carte menu pricing from somebody on the lacrosse board. And online it claims that it's $17 for practice, but no one's ever been billed that, I don't think. When you talk to the people who have used it, because I think they make, what I'm not certain about is like some of the items, like lighting is obviously, if you're at night, you need the lighting. But there's an electricity fee, so I think that's if you need electricity. There's a custodian fee, which I don't know if you can opt out of that or not. There's it's not like a monitoring babysitting sort of fee. Again, if you're having just a practice, do they make you have the monitoring? I don't know, like that's not totally clear. So
Sure.
I don't know what sort of the cheapest rate is.
There was a lot of,
I don't know that anyone.
Interesting.
there was it wasn't an enlightening conversation, but it was a aha kind of a conversation. Like I said, if you're renting a turf for a practice, you don't need a custodian there.
Right,
Right, and if you have a practice during the day, you don't need lights during the day. So if you didn't want to use the lights, you could just offer the turf during the day, which would be more appealing.
right.
So I think it,
Like I need to put in a dollar amount for what the hourly rate is for the turf, and I don't even know how to like, because some of it's over like 2 hours, it's electricity is like an $83 fee for 2 hours. So I'm gonna go in and say what it would be to rent it for 2 hours, not at night. And then divide it by 2 and make an hourly fee, because it's just so like hard to figure out what is the price of the stadium. There is an hourly rate, but there's so many, it's $25 to fill out the application. There's so many ridiculous fees on top of that. It's really hard to say like it's whatever, $250 an hour or whatever, but that's basically what it comes down to. It's in the $200 range somewhere. So I'm working on that because I do have a supply and demand curve that shows what the
But-
utility would be if they would lower the price and then what the total revenue could be.
right, and I think that conversation of the total package was appealing and of interest to understand. I obviously don't want to go backwards, but if they can utilize it and meet that curve of.
Well, and understand who's gonna be renting it, what their
Right.
needs are. You need a practice rate and a game rate, and then a night rate, and that's all you don't need all these other like a la carte things that
Right.
make it so confusing, so. There's some.
If you want a comparison, so at North Park, we have JC Stone Field. And that's what we rent it, the field by the hour. We rent our concession stand, if like, these are all a la carte,
Mhm.
concession stand, scoreboard. Press box and locker rooms, so
Okay,
you can pick from those,
Those
if you only want the field and the locker rooms.
Right.
And you don't need any of that other stuff, you just rent and we bill you for the field and the locker rooms.
okay.
So
Will you
like,
send me the pricing for that? Cause
Yeah,
that's
I
the other
can-
thing I need to gather, I think is, I'd like to get some pricing for just, even if it's just Upper St. Clair. And
Yeah, is it
Peters,
possible
just a
to do
couple
that
of
just as a
those.
group to get St. Clair and Peters Woods and Cool Springs and
Well, I just,
Green
it's not so
Tree.
much, those are way more expensive. I just wanna know what other school districts charge their youth sports for their stadiums.
Right.
I wanna know what Peters Stadium costs. I wanna know what Upper St.
well, the
Clair
reason,
Stadium
yeah, I
costs.
mean, the reason I say if we
and
look at that,
compare.
and when I talked to John about it, was kind of segregating. The cost of what we use within the community and what actually is being spent outside the community. When you look at the sports that are actually going to these third party,
But that's happening less and less because those things are getting.
Outrageous.
The Great Tree and Cool Springs are really expensive
Yeah.
now. Okay, so let's move
Supply
on.
and
to-
demand.
Yeah, go
Um,
ahead again.
Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, that's supply and demand. There's just not enough space for all of the groups and teams. The it'd be nice to figure out the fee structure, but also just with working with the school district, how it functions, Amanda, you know this, it just needs to be path of least resistance, straightforward,
Right.
that they can process it and the groups can give them their money and move on. I think that's an important part of that.
Yes, I'm with you.
So
And-
what was do we move on from the lights? Or is it still part of the
We
light
can't, but
conversation?
if you have something to say about the lights, now is the time.
I just want to ask Tom, who's the driving, are you the driving force behind that? Or is it the school district
uh,
or somebody else? It sounded to me like the school district was like, oh, yeah, that might work.
I think I'm trying to think how I can answer that now being recorded.
Okay, well, I don't, that's fine. The only reason I wanted to know that was, then what, if it's not straight up from the school district, then is there, once you get the information and it's a possibility, then how do you parlay
I've
that?
had a couple seconds to think about it.
Into
think-
looking at the Seymour Field, since we've
Correct.
established that that's a distance. It's not gonna be traveled quickly to get lights there.
And so I will say two things, Ian. One is the concept of commercializing it from a standpoint of revenue could not come from within the school district. It was clearly stated that it cannot be an idea that could be conceptualized or approved internally to say, hey, we're gonna go out and find funding to do this. So it's a lot easier for the community to come to the school district and say, you know, we think we can use 60%. This is the cost, this is the impact, this is how it would happen. So I think that approach, so I initiated that conversation with Dr. Steinhauer, Dr. Davis and John Grogan. They were all three very receptive to that information being provided to be able to make a decision. So I think that's probably the best approach. If it were coming from the school district, probably would never happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have to beat around the bush on it, but if they're not having to directly pay for it, then they're for it. I mean, that's the reality of it.
Yeah,
I would be too.
they've said
So-
that, I mean, they've said that they do feel that there is a need for high school sports that they would utilize it. So there is an internal support for their own usage for whatever sports that would be able to utilize it as well. The other thing that was interesting in that conversation, which was kind of phase two, was let's get the details at the upper practice turf. And then could you do the lower section at Jefferson? Could you do the softball field at Jefferson? Could you do Mellon? Like, could you have the engineers give us the impact of using temporary lighting at these other surfaces? And, you know, they're school district owned. So which was kind of it wasn't shocking, but it was kind of a take back. Like they're realizing that, hey, maybe there's more to this than just, you know, the upper.
It could certainly serve as a case study if they were able to get this to work in the spring. My concern is I think the cost is going to be more than it would work for a pass-through cost. So let's say like soccer, lacrosse, maybe some softball, use the field and the lights. I don't know if it'll be worth it. I don't know if they're willing to pay, you know, if it's $200 or $300 an hour, that's not going to work for them.
Right, and I think that's a part of
It's
this.
gonna have to be a shared.
Right, oh, for sure, and I think the
That's what it
initial cost, which I'm sure we'll have some type of indication whether the units will be purchased, whether the units would be leased. You know, understand the percentage of usage and and that's really what the school district is saying is, hey, we know what the cost would be if we give you the space. You know, we would want it 30%, 40%, so how are you coming up with the difference on the other side? Who's paying for it, how are we gonna, but that goes back, when I talked to John, that goes back to what the turf fee would be, that the turf fees would be raised across the board to offset the exposure and expense of lighting it. So, you know, it goes from like $15 to maybe $50 an hour. And that $50 an hour, and again, just throwing numbers out there was no conversation. But if it were $50 an hour, it would still be far below, you know, competitive numbers, and it would allow for that to be self-funded for everybody. And the school district would assume the $50 rate for the hours that they would use this service. So there's a lot of data, but the support is there.
That happened in the spring.
Yeah.
I love your dream. I like your dream.
Their biggest concern, I mean, the biggest concern was how many parking spots we. I was like, I don't know, you know. So we're addressing it, so yeah.
Good.
See what happens.
All right, we're gonna move on unless anybody has anything else on that. The next item is the main park site plan and recreation center architectural study. These things have the longest name. You guys need to get some acronyms. And there's an attachment for that as well. To the packet that was an update from Ian about the timeline of that. Is that anything else to add to that, David?
Yes. So in that memo, Mr. McMeans recommends an approach similar to what was used with the Parks and Recreation Study, as we have condensed that name down. It's where there'll be a group of stakeholders to help develop the RFP and guide the process. Ian is the project lead commissioner. Answater Wilson would be the commission champion. We would have some staff, including Rudy Sukel and myself and others. And then we would also want one representative from the Sports Advisory Board and one from the Parks Advisory Board. There's a timeline in that memo, and the first meeting of this group is supposed to happen sometime this month. I mean, obviously that could shift a little bit, but that means tonight is the night to select a representative to that committee.
Okay, who's not on the call?
Yeah. John is absent. Okay, so we need to find a representative from our group, because Chad, you were the representative from the last one, right? But isn't that, it was what he did for the last one? Is that sort of what this,
Yeah.
the idea is?
It's, yeah, you're gonna help develop the RFP, select the consultant, all guide that process.
I am not interested in the role. You already just roped me into being chair another year, so
I'm out of town that week.
I'm out.
Lead times or days, or is it flexible?
It'd be, we'd look for a convenient.
At each meeting, we agreed on when work for the next one. And if there's nothing to do for a while, you wait 2 months, and then when there's more to do, you might meet twice. I mean, it flows pretty nice. It's organized.
If I do it, can we move to new business? That just.
Yes,
goes right on.
that moves right on and out the door. That's right. All right, we got it here. Unless anyone online objects, Stefan is willing to take the role.
Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah. I'm saying, beating down your door, wanting to take over. All right. Item 10, new business.
You had something.
I'm the one I think I'm gonna hold off on this, I guess I could do new business or an announcement, but. I was contacted through David by the Mount Lebanon Magazine. They're running an article about field. Allocation, the field allocation process. So I had like 20 or 30-minute conversation with that. The writer, and she didn't know when it was gonna come out. Probably in the next, they planned pretty far ahead. But we chatted about what the field meetings are like. We talked about the process. I told her a bit about the field census study and how we were working on that. And what our goals are with that. And I also mentioned as a sort of a public service announcement that most Mount Lebanon residents don't understand, but this is a good chance to tell them that all the fields in the area are not run by the same people that there are Mount Lebanon fields. Municipality fields and school district fields, and how that those being two separate entities complicates the process sometimes, and how people don't really understand that. So hopefully she'll put something in the article to educate the population a little bit about that and some of the challenges we face with the process, but also how we're trying to the process and how we do have people working on it. So hopefully that'll get us some positive just at least information out there. I think that's helpful. And she was gonna contact me again when we're ready to run it. If I have more information to share with her, I will update her as things roll out. But
I spent about 45 minutes on the phone with her explaining the process. She initially thought she might like to discuss like all athletic facilities in addition to the fields. I said, okay, let's see if we get through the fields first.
Yeah.
And she was amazed at the level of detail and
Complex.
how different fields are treated differently, and some are built and some aren't, and some are the schools, and and then you have turf fields, and then you have this stadium that's completely different than anything else. It's like she found it very enlightening. I think
Yeah.
she thought it was going to be a lot simpler than
Right.
it really is.
And I talked about it from the standpoint of sports organizations, how we, for the one I'm most familiar with, we have the meeting in July for the fall, but we still have our registration open, and you don't really know your needs. And then when you do know your needs, you hope you have enough field space. And if you don't, then you're like bartering with people after the fact. Like, it is a very complex process that people don't truly understand until they're a part of it. So. And also we talked about that, she mentioned that you had said that that there is a good spirit of cooperation, and in the end, there's like, you do come to a consensus and people do, there is some give and take, and it's not a knockdown, drag out fight, it's relatively cooperative. And that's a positive thing, but that also just because everybody gets something doesn't mean they get exactly what they want or how, as much as they want, so.
Right, I think she understood that, you know, the reason there's this elaborate process and that people don't get what they want is because there's a shortage of fields.
Yeah.
So I think she understood that part of it too.
So, all in all, it was a good discussion, and hopefully that'll kind of kick things off a little bit with the timing of the field census study as we try to wrap that up and get that out to the various constituents, so, and it is in the works, so. That's all I have. Any other announcements? Or new business? All right, then we will adjourn at 9:14. We're only 4 minutes behind. That was
Nice job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Night.
Thanks, everyone.
JC's the